Welcome to Module 13. Module 13 begins the final unit of NT501. And so we're going to look at three tenses in this unit. In this module, we're going to look at the imperfect tense. In Module 14, we're going to look at the aorist tense. And in Module 15, we're going to look at the perfect tense. The final module in the class contains the final exam. Now, the main indicator that you're dealing with the imperfect or the aorist is that the verb will augment. An augment is simply an epsilon that goes at the beginning of the word. It's just like adding an ed to the end of our English verbs to indicate the past tense. But with an augment, it's a prefix, and so it goes at the beginning of the verb. Now remember that you'll find a breathing mark over every word that begins with a vowel or a row. And so since the augment is going to be an epsilon, that's a vowel. And so whenever you see that augment, remember, you're going to have to put a breathing mark on the beginning of those words. And even verbs that begin with a vowel, when that augment comes up against the vowel, we're going to get some contraction. So beware of that as well. And so even though this is a new paradigm, make sure that you memorize it well. And so besides the fact that you're going to see it on a quiz and an exam, you'll see a version of this paradigm in the next few modules when we look at the aorist tense, specifically the aorist tense. And so taking the time to memorize that paradigm now is going to be really key and really helpful when you get into the aorist tense. Just like the present tense, the imperfect tense will give the verb a sense of ongoing action. So just like the present tense, we translated luo, I am loosing, and we're going to translate other verbs, I am ing. We're going to translate the imperfect with a past tense notion, but with an ongoing action. So what is that going to look like? We're going to translate et luan as I was loosing. And so it's past tense, but it's continuous. And so instead of I am loosing for the present tense, we're going to translate it I was loosing as the imperfect. This will make a little more sense when we talk about the aorist tense in the next module, which describes the verb with an undefined action. And so we're going to translate the aorist simply as I loosed. And so a little bit different than I was loosing, we're going to translate it as an undefined action, I loosed. Don't worry about that right now. Right now, just focus on the fact that when we translate the imperfect, we're going to translate it with that continuous idea, I was loosing. Finally, make sure that you focus on the principal parts for the different verbs. Basically, the principal parts are the different stems of a verb that will change depending on the tense of the verb. And so just like English, some verbs change their stem based on their tense. In English, most verbs are regular, and in Greek, most verbs are regular. And in English, we just add an ed to the end. And so if I walk to the store yesterday, I walked. And so even though some words kind of mess around with that ed suffix, like studied, where the y turns to I, they're still going to be regular, still going to function regularly. And we'll see that in Greek. Other verbs in English are slightly altered, but they're still irregular. And so build becomes built. And so we're not going to say builded. Sing becomes sang. Run becomes ran, eat becomes ate. We could probably go on and list a number of verbs where there's a little bit of a shift, but they're irregular. We don't just add the ed, but you can look at that past tense stem and make sense of the verb, where the verb is coming from. And then finally, other verbs are completely different. And so I go becomes I went, for example. One verb in Greek that kind of sticks out in my mind is lego. Remember, lego is the present tense, I say or I am saying. The aorist tense is apen, and so you guys have already learned apen in your vocabulary. So apen is I said. And so we'll talk more about that in the next module when we look at the aorist. So the same thing that happens in English with these different types of verbs, regular verbs and irregular verbs, and I even characterize our irregular verbs as semi-irregular and then completely irregular. And even our semi irregular verbs, there's some patterns like seeing became sang. Well, other verbs that end in that ing are going to have that ang ending in the past tense. So ring becomes rang, that sort of thing. Spring becomes spring, something along those lines. And so the same thing is going to happen in Greek. The stem will indicate the tense of the verb, and the ending will indicate the person and number. Knowing these different verb stems will help you identify the tense of the verb that's before you. And this will come more into play in the next module when we look at the aorist tense and we compare the aorist tense with the imperfect. Now, Mounts lists the principal parts in the vocabulary section. And so when he identifies the verb in parentheses, he gives 6 different slots. And so each verb is going to have 6 principal parts. Not every verb has each part, and he puts dashes where they are. Your first principal part is going to be your present tense and imperfect. Your second principal part is going to be your future tense. Your third principal part is going to be your aorist active. Your fourth principal part is going to be your perfect active. Your fifth principal part is going to be your perfect middle passive. And then your sixth principal part is going to be your aorist passive and future passive. And so make sure that you are getting to a point where you can recognize those principal parts. I would recommend that you copy the principal parts on your vocabulary card so that you see them at regular intervals. When you're studying your vocabulary, you're regularly seeing those 6 principal parts. That's it for now. If you have any questions about the imperfect or the course, just please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'd love to chat with you more.